The Navigators represent both humanity's greatest triumph and its most profound tragedy. They are living proof that survival in the darkness of the 41st millennium requires transformation into something that can endure horrors no baseline human was ever meant to witness. They are necessary. They are irreplaceable. They are slowly being destroyed by the very power that makes them invaluable. The mutation that marks every Navigator is the third eye, the warp eye, positioned in the centre of their forehead like some obscene mockery of enlightenment. In newborns, this additional organ often resembles a normal human eye, complete with recognisable sclera and iris. Parents might look upon their child and see something almost ordinary, almost human. This resemblance does not last. As the Navigator grows in power and age, as the eye is repeatedly exposed to the psychic radiation of the Empyrean, it changes. The transformation is gradual but inexorable. The sclera darkens first, a spreading stain like ink seeping through white fabric. The iris follows, colours fading until only shadow remains. Eventually, what was once an eye becomes a solid black sphere, hardened and inhuman, utterly alien to the face it inhabits. In the most extreme cases, the eyelids themselves shrink away or disappear entirely, leaving a single obsidian orb staring from the Navigator's skull with neither blink nor rest. This is merely the beginning. The Navigator gene, engineered in the dark age of technology by methods now lost to time or perhaps deliberately hidden, is stable compared to most mutations that plague humanity. But stability is relative. The gene still spawns countless other deformities throughout its host's body and soul, unpredictable variations that compound with each generation. Some Navigator families have accumulated beneficial mutations alongside the detrimental ones, inhuman strength allowing them to move with power that belies their often slender frames, agility beyond human limits, their movements possessed of an unsettling fluidity, indomitable willpower forged through generations of staring into the warp and refusing to break, complete black eyes in addition to the third, granting vision in absolute darkness, fingers that terminate in deadly claws rather than normal nails. Bodies capable of regenerating from wounds that would cripple ordinary humans permanently. But for every fortunate mutation, there are a dozen grotesque ones, teeth transforming into sharp needles that make speech difficult and eating an ordeal, bodies swelling uncomfortably, growing large and bulbous until movement becomes laboured, skin taking on inhuman textures, becoming scaly or translucent enough to see the organs pulsing beneath, limbs elongating beyond normal proportions or multiplying in grotesque profusion, facial features melting away into smooth, featureless expanses broken only by that terrible third eye. The Navigator houses guard these secrets carefully, hiding away the most extreme specimens or, when necessary, quietly eliminating infants whose mutations would draw unwanted attention from the Inquisition or rival houses eager to expose genetic weakness. The eugenics programs within the Navigator houses, the Navis Nobilitae as they call themselves, attempt to manage these mutations through careful selective breeding. Each house tries to perfect unique aspects of their powers while minimizing detrimental variations, but constant exposure to the warp ensures that no amount of genetic screening can prevent the slow accumulation of changes. Every time a Navigator opens their third eye to guide a ship through the immaterium, they invite corruption. Not necessarily the taint of chaos, though that danger exists, but simply the warping influence of a dimension that was never meant to touch baseline reality. The warp changes whatever it touches. Navigators are changed most of all, for they must embrace that contact repeatedly throughout their long lives. Young Navigators, fresh from their training in the fundamentals of their craft, often revel in their position. They are nobility, born into ancient houses whose wealth and influence rival the most powerful organizations in the Imperium. They are exempt from many imperial laws, their houses operating with autonomy that even the Inquisition approaches cautiously. They know themselves to be essential, utterly irreplaceable components of humanity's galactic machine. On many worlds, common citizens fear even to meet the gaze of a Navigator's normal eyes, let alone the horror concealed beneath the bandana or shutter that covers the third. This combination of wealth, power, and fear can intoxicate young Navigators, leading them to affect rakish mannerisms and dismissive attitudes toward those they consider beneath them. But experience teaches different lessons. The oldest Navigators, those who have spent centuries guiding ships through the warp, tell a different story through their twisted bodies and haunted expressions. They are the ones who understand the true price of their gift. Many become virtual prisoners, confined to their sanctums aboard ships, or locked within the fortress estates of their houses, dependent on life-sustaining machinery to compensate for bodies that have failed under the accumulated stress of countless warp exposures. Their mutations have progressed beyond what cosmetics or clothing can conceal. Their minds, even those protected by genetic design from the warp's corrupting influence, bear scars that never fully heal. The act of navigation itself is an experience that defies easy description. When a navigator settles into their sanctum to guide a ship through the warp, they are not simply plotting a course on charts or calculating trajectories. They are opening their consciousness directly to a dimension of pure chaos, of emotional energy given physical form, of thoughts and feelings made manifest as raging currents and impossible geometries. The sanctum provides some protection. These chambers are built deep within Imperial void ships, sealed spaces filled with life support systems that can sustain a navigator for weeks or months of continuous vigil. They are warded with psychic protections, ritually blessed by the Mechanicus, and isolated from the rest of the crew by pressure doors and radiation baffles. Some are spheroid chambers between 2 and 10 decks in diameter, delivered wholly finished by the navigator houses and installed during a ship's construction. In certain extreme cases, navigators have served aboard vessels for hundreds of years without ever leaving their sanctum, sustained by conduits that feed power and nutrients while they fulfill their singular purpose. Within these chambers, alone or attended only by the most trusted servants and younger family members learning the craft, the navigator prepares for the translation into the warp. Rituals vary by house and individual preference. Some read runes cast from inscribed bones, seeking portents in their patterns. Others enter trance states, rambling prophecies that servitors dutifully record for later analysis. Still others perform divinations using methods that might appear archaic or even primitive to outsiders, but have proven effective through millennia of tradition. These preparations are not superstition. They are attempts to prepare the navigator's psyche for what comes next, to build mental barriers and establish the proper mindset for confronting the incomprehensible. When all preparations are complete, when the ship has reached the Mandeville point far enough from the system's gravity well to safely engage warp drives, the navigator enters a trance-like state. They meld their consciousness with the ship's machine spirit, becoming part of the vessel itself in a way that transcends mere piloting. Through this connection, they send the command to raise the Geller field, the bubble of reality that will protect the ship and its crew from the predations of the warp. Then, and only then, does the navigator open their third eye fully. What they perceive in that moment is unique to each individual. The navigator gene provides some protection, filtering the warp's mind-shattering truth through perceptual frameworks that allow human consciousness to process what it witnesses without immediate dissolution into gibbering madness. For some, the warp manifests as a storm-racked forest, where the correct path winds between trees that reach with branches of solidified screaming. Step from that path, and the horrors lurking in the undergrowth will tear the ship apart, dragging its crew into nightmare dimensions where time has no meaning and sanity is a forgotten concept. For others, the immaterium appears as a raging ocean, waves hundreds of kilometers high, crashing with the force of dying stars, currents capable of sweeping a vessel light years off course or centuries off schedule. Desert sandstorms where each grain of sand is a fragment of mortal emotion. Shifting cities of night where buildings are built from crystallized fears and streets run with rivers of despair. A million different perceptions, all attempting to give comprehensible form to that which has no true form. Experienced navigators, those whose power has matured through decades or centuries of exposure, begin to perceive the warp more directly. The abstraction fades. They see deeper, witnessing truths about the nature of the immaterium that would destroy lesser minds. They observe the actual currents of psychic energy. The eddy is created by massive emotions, the gravitational shadows cast by real space phenomena into the Empyrean. They perceive the presence of entities that dwell within the warp, demons and worse things, creatures drawn to the light of souls like moths to flame, and they must navigate through all of this while maintaining their connection to the ship, constantly making minute course corrections, exploiting favourable currents, avoiding the shoals and reefs that can trap vessels for eternity. The Astronomicon serves as their guiding light in this chaos. This psychic beacon, generated by the Emperor's will and sustained by the deaths of countless psykers sacrificed daily on Terra, shines through the warp with the radiance of a second sun. Navigators perceive it as their primary reference point, the one stable landmark in an otherwise incomprehensible dimension. They plot their courses relative to its position, using its light to determine not just direction but location, identifying safe routes that have been mapped over millennia of trial and error. Without the Astronomicon, warp travel becomes exponentially more dangerous. Ships are limited to short, calculated jumps of only a few light years, with each transition carrying significant risk of being lost or emerging centuries off schedule. The beacon's range is vast but not infinite. Beyond the edges of the Imperium, where the Astronomicon's light grows weak and finally fades entirely, navigators must rely on other methods, their abilities constrained and their jumps shortened dramatically. The physical toll of navigation varies with distance and warp conditions. A short jump through relatively calm regions of the Immaterium might require only hours of concentration. Longer voyages, crossing thousands of light years, can last weeks or even months of continuous vigil. During this time, the navigator remains in their trance state, their consciousness split between the ship and the warp, their body sustained by the Sanctum's life support systems. They do not truly sleep during these periods, though they can enter a reduced state of awareness that provides some rest. Pushing too far, maintaining the connection for too long, risks falling into a comatose state from which some navigators never fully recover. Ship captains must carefully balance the need for speed against the endurance of their navigator, rotating between multiple navigators when available, allowing recovery time between major jumps. The psychic strain is worse than the physical. Every moment spent observing the warp exposes the navigator's consciousness to its influence. They perceive emotions made manifest, the raw stuff of thoughts and feelings given terrible form. Rage appears as crimson fire that would immolate the soul. Despair flows in black rivers that could drown all hope. Terror takes shape as shadows with too many teeth and not enough substance. Love, twisted in the warp, becomes obsession that consumes rather than nurtures. Even the positive emotions of baseline reality become something else in the Immaterium, distorted by the medium through which they propagate. The navigator must witness all of this, must immerse themselves in it, while maintaining the mental discipline to remember they are observing rather than experiencing. They must not allow the warp's nature to seep into their own psyche, must not let its madness become their madness. This is where the navigator gene's true protection manifests. Unlike ordinary psykers who channel the warp's power through themselves, risking possession or corruption with every use of their abilities, navigators observe without channeling. Their third eye is a window, not a doorway. They look into the abyss, but the abyss finds it difficult to look back with the same intensity. This does not make them immune to chaos. Navigators can still be corrupted, still be turned to the service of the dark gods, but they possess a resistance that even trained psykers might envy. They can momentarily slow the warp's insidious effects, using their mental strength to resist the poison of chaos for longer than any normal human could hope to endure. Yet resistance is not immunity. Every exposure leaves its mark. Navigators accumulate psychic scars that never fully heal, residual impressions of horrors witnessed, fragments of warp stuff that lodge in their consciousness like splinters of glass. Over time, these accumulate. Dreams become troubled, plagued by nightmares drawn from memories of things glimpsed in the Immaterium. Some navigators acquire Eldar Dreamstones, Xenos artifacts that help alleviate these nightmares, a small mercy purchased from those who also understand the burden of perceiving the warp's nature. Even waking hours can become difficult as boundaries between memory and present experience begin to blur. A navigator might see warp shadows overlaying normal reality, catch glimpses of things that are not quite there, hear whispers in languages that cause physical pain to comprehend. The navigator houses attempt to manage these effects through various means. Rest periods between voyages, however brief the Imperium's needs allow. Meditation techniques passed down through generations, methods for organizing traumatic memories and compartmentalizing horror. In some cases, more drastic measures become necessary. Navigators whose minds begin to fracture under the accumulated strain are quietly retired, sequestered in comfortable chambers, within their house estates where they can live out their remaining years without endangering ships or crews, those whose fracturing manifests as dangerous psychoses or heretical compulsions face harsher fates. The Navis nobility polices itself ruthlessly, eliminating threats before the Inquisition has cause to investigate. Better to lose one navigator than risk the entire house being declared tainted. The political structure of the Navis nobilitae adds additional layers of pressure and danger to already perilous lives. The navigator houses are not united organizations, but rather ancient rival dynasties locked in constant competition for power, influence, and contracts. Each house maintains its own traditions, its own methods of training, its own carefully guarded genetic variations that distinguish their bloodline from others. These differences are sources of pride, markers of identity that have been preserved across millennia. They are also weapons in endless political wars. The great houses fight for dominance using every tool at their disposal. Marriage alliances bind certain families together in temporary or lasting partnerships, combining genetic lines and pooling resources. Economic warfare disrupts rivals' contracts and undermines their financial positions. Espionage reveals closely guarded secrets about genetic weaknesses or heretical practices. Assassination removes key figures whose leadership or abilities threaten a rival house's interests. Even open warfare sometimes erupts, though the administratum generally tolerates only minor skirmishes, recognizing that the loss of too many navigators would threaten the Imperium itself. Navigators born into this environment must navigate political dangers as carefully as they navigate the warp. Every interaction with members of other houses carries potential for betrayal. Every contract negotiation conceals layers of ulterior motives. Success brings not just personal advancement, but elevation of their entire family. Failure can result in loss of face, reduced standing among the nobility, or in extreme cases, assassination by rivals who see an opportunity to cripple a competing bloodline. To be born a navigator is to be born into a gilded cage. The wealth is real. Navigator houses maintain fortress estates that rival the palaces of planetary governors, accumulating treasures from across the galaxy through millennia of trade monopolies. The power is real. A navigator house's novator can command resources equivalent to an imperial sector's annual budget. But the price of this wealth and power is isolation. Common citizens fear and mistrust mutants, even sanctioned ones like navigators. Many navigators spend their lives within the controlled environments of their house estates or ship sanctums, venturing into broader imperial society only when absolutely necessary and always attended by guards prepared to deal with hostile reactions. The isolation is as much psychological as physical. How can a navigator truly relate to ordinary humans who have never witnessed the warp's true nature? How can they explain the experience of perceiving reality's underpinnings, of seeing the emotional resonance beneath material existence? Other navigators understand, but they are rivals as often as allies, and trust within the Navis nobility as a currency more precious than thrones. The navigator's existence becomes defined by their function. They guide ships. That is their purpose. Everything else, all the wealth and power and political maneuvering, exists in service to that singular role. And always, underlying everything, is the knowledge of what navigation costs. The mutations that progressively deform their bodies, the psychic scars that accumulate with each journey, the risk of catastrophic failure during any voyage when a moment's inattention or an unexpected warp storm could doom everyone aboard, the certainty that the oldest navigators, those who have served longest and most faithfully, inevitably become twisted shadows of their former selves. To accept the navigator's burden is to accept slow transformation into something that can barely be called human anymore, sacrificing normalcy and eventually physical and mental integrity in service to an imperium that simultaneously needs and despises them. Beyond navigation itself, the Third Eye grants navigators powers that remain deliberately shrouded in mystery. The navigators themselves speak reluctantly about these abilities, guarding their secrets from outsiders and even from younger members of their own houses. Only the Paternova, the supreme leader of all navigators, is believed to understand the full potential of what the Warp Eye can achieve. What is known is terrifying enough. The Third Eye's most infamous power is its ability to deliver death with a glance. When a navigator removes the bandana or shutter covering their Warp Eye and directs its gaze at an ordinary human, that person experiences sudden, agonizing mental exposure to the immaterium itself. Their consciousness is flooded with psychic radiation from a dimension their baseline mind was never designed to comprehend. The result is swift and horrifying. Blood vessels rupture behind their eyes. Neurons fire in cascading storms of overload. Their body convulses as their brain attempts to process the impossible before simply shutting down. Death comes within seconds, though those seconds feel like eternities of incomprehensible horror. This is why most people fear even meeting the normal eyes of a navigator, knowing that just above them lurks something far more dangerous. The lidless stare, as this killing gaze is formerly known, affects even hardened warriors and experienced combatants. No amount of training or mental conditioning can fully prepare someone to have their consciousness exposed to the raw warp. Space Marines, with their enhanced physiology and psycho-conditioning, can sometimes resist longer than ordinary humans, but even they are not immune. The third eye sees beyond physical reality into the nature of souls themselves, and when turned as a weapon, it forces that perception in reverse, making its target glimpse truths that annihilate sanity and body together. Some navigator houses have refined variations of this deadly power. The more pious houses, those that frame their abilities as gifts from the Emperor himself, employ their third eye to unleash what they call cleansing flame. This non-lethal but still scarring radiation melts flesh from bone without killing immediately, causing intense suffering while leaving the victim's skeleton exposed and blackened. These zealots consider it a fitting punishment for those who displease them, a demonstration of divine authority they believe the Emperor granted them. The cruelest navigators prolong the exposure, allowing the flesh to melt slowly, maximizing agony. They justify this brutality by proclaiming that their third eye manifests the Emperor's judgment, that they are instruments of holy retribution against heretics and sinners within their own ranks. The most extreme manifestation of the third eye's destructive potential is known as the red tide. When a navigator unleashes this power, psychic energy floods outward in waves that instantly evaporate any flesh they touch. Bones are reduced to ash, metal corrodes, stone cracks and crumbles. The red tide serves primarily to destroy obstacles blocking the navigator's path, but it also kills anyone who attempts to hide from the eye's direct gaze, the energy flowing around barriers and through cover to reach its targets. The power is detrimental to the navigator who employs it, burning through their psychic reserves and damaging their third eye itself. It is considered a weapon of last resort, a final sacrifice to be used only when survival depends on absolute destruction of everything in the immediate vicinity. Most navigators never employ the red tide in their entire lives, knowing that prolonged use risks permanent damage to the very organ that defines their existence. But the third eye possesses abilities beyond mere destruction. The most developed navigators, particularly those designated as heirs apparent, discover that their perception of the warp includes glimpses of possible futures. Time within the immaterium does not flow in linear fashion as it does in real space. Past, present, and future exist simultaneously, visible to those who can perceive deeply enough into the warp's nature. A skilled navigator can catch glimpses of what might come, seeing potential outcomes of current events branching like rivers dividing at a delta. This precognition is limited and uncertain. The futures perceived are possibilities rather than inevitabilities, timelines that could occur rather than predictions carved in stone. Yet even this limited foresight proves valuable. A navigator who glimpses danger moments before it arrives can alter their actions, avoiding tragedies that would otherwise be unavoidable. Some navigators exploit this ability for political advantage, presenting themselves as soothsayers to wealthy nobles and imperial officials. They deliver short snippets of prophecy, often vague enough to be interpreted in multiple ways, using their genuine glimpses of possible futures to enhance their standing and influence. The fact that their predictions come true, often enough to seem miraculous, ensures their services remain in high demand. An even stranger ability allows certain navigators to step sideways through time itself. By perceiving the warp's atemporal nature, they can shift themselves into an adjacent timeline, effectively removing themselves from danger by simply walking into a version of reality where the threat never existed. This power manifests as a sort of precognitive dodge, the navigator unconsciously or deliberately moving out of harm's way before they consciously recognize the danger. To observers, it appears as though attacks pass through the navigator or miss by impossible margins. The navigator themselves experiences a moment of disorientation as they shift between nearly identical timelines, returning to their original timeline only after the danger has passed. This ability develops only in the most powerful navigators, those whose connection to the warp has deepened to the point where they can manipulate its fundamental properties rather than merely observing them. Navigators of different houses sometimes settle disputes through formal duels, contests where both combatants employ their third eye against each other in controlled combat. These duels are rare but spectacular events, carefully regulated by tradition and overseen by seconds from each participant's house. They take place in private chambers where no one outside the immediate participants can witness the full force of navigator powers being unleashed. The mystique of the Navis Nobilite depends partly on ordinary humans not comprehending the true extent of navigator abilities, so these duels remain secret affairs conducted away from public scrutiny. The ritual proceeds with careful formality. Both navigators bow to acknowledge each other's status, then slowly remove the covering from their third eye. At a signal from the seconds, they unleash their power simultaneously, locking their gazes together. What follows is a test of both physical and mental endurance. Each navigator stares unflinchingly into the other's warp eye, forcing themselves to perceive not just the warp itself but their opponent's perspective of it as well. They witness the boiling chaos of the Empyrean reflected and refracted through another navigator's consciousness, experiencing layers of horror and madness that compound exponentially. The duel becomes a contest of willpower, each navigator attempting to break their opponent's concentration to make them flinch or look away first. These duels can last seconds or stretch into hours depending on the participants' relative power and determination. The first navigator to succumb, dropping to one knee or covering their eye, yields victory to their opponent. The duels are rarely to the death. Navigators are too valuable, even bitter rivals, for their houses to permit their casual destruction. But the psychological scars from such contests never fully heal. To stare into another navigator's warp eye is to experience the immaterium in ways that even normal navigation cannot prepare one for. The defeated navigator carries memories of that exposure for the rest of their life, a reminder of the moment they were forced to acknowledge another's superiority in the one realm where they should reign supreme. Above all navigators, transcending the feuding houses and political machinations, stands the Paternova. This figure serves as the ultimate authority of the Navis Nobilite, residing in the Palace of the Navigators that dominates the centre of Terra's Navigator Quarter. From the moment of installation, the Paternova never leaves this palace. The staff, soldiers and retainers are all drawn from the Paternova's own house, replaced entirely when a new Paternova rises to power. The chief servant is the Paternoval envoy, who represents the Navis Nobilite in the Senatorum Imperialis, sometimes serving as one of the High Lords of Terra itself. Through this envoy, the Paternova's will shapes imperial policy despite never appearing in person before the Imperium's ruling bodies. The Paternova's true power, however, extends far beyond political authority. This supreme navigator possesses the ability to somehow control or amplify the warp sense of all other navigators throughout the galaxy. The mechanism remains obscure even to the navigators themselves, a mystery bound up in navigator biology at its most fundamental level. The Paternova is described as the guiding father whose powers transcend the warp itself, a psychic anchor that strengthens every navigator's connection to the immaterium. When the Paternova lives, navigators across the galaxy perform their duties with confidence, their abilities functioning at full capacity. Ships traverse the warp on predictable schedules, trade flows smoothly between systems, the Imperium's economy and military logistics operate with the efficiency that only reliable faster-than-light travel can provide. But when the Paternova dies, everything changes. The moment of death resonates through the warp itself, touching every navigator simultaneously regardless of distance. All navigators, save the heirs apparent, feel their powers suddenly diminish. The reduction is not subtle. Young navigators may lose their abilities entirely, finding themselves unable to perceive the warp at all. Experienced navigators struggle with navigation that was previously routine, their perception clouded and uncertain. Warp journeys take longer, as navigators work harder to guide their ships through currents they can barely sense. Ships are lost in greater numbers, crews disappearing into the immaterium never to emerge. If this state continued indefinitely, The Imperium would face catastrophic collapse. Without reliable warp travel, communication between systems would degrade to unusable timescales. Military forces would be unable to coordinate across sectors. Trade would cease. Isolated worlds would fall into darkness, cut off from support and slowly dying as their resources depleted. The entire galaxy-spanning edifice of human civilization would fragment into isolated pockets, each left to survive or perish alone. But the interregnum does not last because the death of the Paternova triggers something horrifying in the heirs apparent. These are the most powerful navigators from each of the great houses, those who have served longest and developed their abilities to the highest degree. Many have developed bulging chests as internal gills grow within their rib cages, though not all heirs apparent manifest this particular mutation. They are already bitter rivals competing for influence and status, sometimes attempting to assassinate each other even before the Paternova's death. The moment the old Paternova dies, however, their rivalry transforms into something far more primal. The heirs apparent begin to change rapidly. They grow larger and stronger with impossible speed, their mutations becoming more pronounced as their bodies undergo accelerated transformation. The internal gills become fully functional, allowing them to survive in hard vacuum, underwater, or in atmospheres poisonous to normal humans. Their aggression increases exponentially, rational thought subsumed beneath a burning compulsion to destroy all other heirs apparent. They lose many normal brain functions, intelligence and personality fading as feral instinct takes control. They become beasts driven by a single purpose, to find and kill every other being like themselves. With the last shreds of their humanity, the transformed heirs apparent are drawn to one another across the galaxy. They can sense each other's presence through the warp, tracking their rivals with the same skills they once used to guide ships between stars. But now those skills serve only violence. They converge on locations where they can reach each other, arranging confrontations either deliberately or through unconscious compulsion. Then they fight. The battles between transformed heirs apparent are spectacular and terrible. These are beings who possess centuries of experience perceiving and manipulating the warp, now turned entirely toward mutual destruction. They employ every power their third eye can manifest. Killing gazes flash back and forth, each heir apparent forcing the others to endure direct exposure to the immaterium. Psychic energy lashes out in waves. Reality itself seems to distort around them as they bend the boundary between warp and real space through sheer force of will. The combat continues until one heir dies. Then the survivors change further, growing even larger and more powerful, their abilities amplifying as each death somehow transfers strength to those who remain. The process continues, an elimination tournament conducted on a galactic scale, until finally only one heir apparent survives. The last remaining heir undergoes a final transformation. Their senses return. Intelligence and personality reassert themselves, though fundamentally altered by what they have experienced and become. This being, vastly changed from what they were, becomes the new Paternova. The moment they assume the role, their power flows outward through the warp, touching every navigator simultaneously, just as the previous Paternova's death had. The diminished abilities of ordinary navigators are restored. Ships can once again traverse the galaxy with confidence. The Imperium breathes a collective sigh of relief as the crisis passes. But the restoration is not uniform. Navigators who belong to the same house as the new Paternova find their abilities enhanced beyond previous levels, as though blood relationship allows the Paternova to transmit power more effectively to his kin. Navigators who belong to the previous Paternova's house lose the special advantage they once enjoyed, their powers returning only to baseline levels. Many find themselves significantly weaker than they were under the old regime. The political implications are profound. Houses rise and fall in influence based on which family produces each Paternova. The cycle of succession ensures that no single house maintains dominance forever, but the years when one's house holds the Paternova position represent periods of unparalleled opportunity and advantage. The Paternova can live for up to 1,000 years, far longer than even the extended natural lifespan of ordinary navigators. But mortality remains inevitable. Eventually, age or accumulated damage from centuries of warp exposure takes its toll. The Paternova dies, the cycle begins again, and throughout all of it, the navigators must continue performing their duties, guiding ships even as their powers wax and wane with forces beyond their control. The oldest navigators, those who have served for centuries and survived multiple Paternova successions, become something barely recognizable as human. The mutations that accumulated over their long lives transform them into grotesque figures, bodies twisted by the warp's influence into shapes that inspire horror in those who witness them. Their minds, though still functional, bear scars from countless exposures to the immaterium, memories of horrors glimpsed that can never be forgotten or properly processed. These ancient navigators typically withdraw from active service, sequestering themselves in luxurious isolation within their house estates. They become prisoners of their own status and deformities, confined to private chambers attended by loyal servants and sustained by life support machinery that compensates for bodies failing under accumulated stress. Yet even in isolation, these elders wield tremendous influence. Their age grants them authority within their houses. Their experience makes them repositories of knowledge about navigation routes, political strategies, and the hidden weaknesses of rival houses. When critical decisions must be made, when a new novator must be chosen to lead the house, the elders emerge from their chambers to cast their votes and offer their counsel. Their voices carry weight that younger navigators cannot match, wisdom purchased through centuries of sacrifice, but wisdom is cold comfort for those who have become monsters in service to their family and the Imperium. They remember what they once were, when their mutations were minimal and their bodies functioned without constant mechanical assistance. They know what they have become, creatures that would horrify their younger selves, and they understand that this is the inevitable fate awaiting every navigator who serves long enough. The transformation is not optional, it is the price of their gift, paid in installments across centuries until finally the debt consumes them entirely. Some houses maintain deep dungeons beneath their fortress estates, chambers where the most severely mutated navigators are kept when their transformations progress beyond what even their families can tolerate. These are not prisons exactly, but neither are they willing residences. Navigators whose minds have finally succumbed to the accumulated trauma, whose mutations have rendered them into things that attack even their own kin, are brought to these dungeons and kept there for the remainder of their existence. They are fed and maintained, their basic needs met by servitors or heavily armed guards, but they are removed from navigator society entirely. Their names are struck from family records. They become non-persons, cautionary tales whispered among the younger generation about what happens to those who push too hard or serve too long. The houses prefer to handle these matters internally. Better to quietly disappear a failed navigator than allow the Inquisition to discover how often the gene curse manifests in its most extreme forms. Better to maintain the illusion of control than admit that every navigator walks a path that could end in the dungeons, no matter how careful they are or how pure their bloodline claims to be. There exist navigator houses that have fallen from grace, their status within the Navi's nobility diminished through scandal, genetic degradation, or simple bad fortune. The shrouded houses, sometimes called beggar houses by their more successful rivals, operate at the margins of imperial space. They have lost the prestigious contracts that feed wealth and influence to the great houses. Individual navigators receive little support from their impoverished families, forced to become resourceful and cunning simply to survive. But adversity has unexpected benefits. These struggling navigators often develop more perceptive warp eyes than their privileged counterparts, their abilities honed by necessity as they navigate dangerous routes that richer houses avoid. They take contracts that others refuse, guiding ships into regions where the Astronomican's light barely reaches, employing skills born from desperation and maintained through constant danger. Then there are the renegade houses, families that have been rejected by the Paternova himself or exiled due to conflicts with other houses. These navigators exist outside the traditional strictures of the Navis nobilite, no longer bound by the codes and traditions that govern their former peers. They cast aside imperial dogma and navigator custom alike, offering their services to whoever pays best regardless of legality or loyalty. Some serve criminal cartels, guiding smuggling vessels through patrol routes and blockades. Others work for rogue traders who operate beyond the Imperium's official borders. Still others have turned to chaos, using their third eye in service to the ruinous powers. These fallen navigators are hunted by their former houses and the Inquisition alike, but they are difficult to find and dangerous to confront. A navigator who has abandoned all restraint, who employs their full power without concern for consequences or survival, becomes a terrible enemy. They have spent lifetimes learning to perceive and manipulate the warp. Now they turn that expertise toward destruction, using abilities that loyal navigators carefully control with utter abandon. They can navigate chaos fleets through warp storms that would destroy Imperial vessels. They can unleash their killing gaze without the hesitation that comes from fearing Imperial judgment. They become living weapons in service to forces that gleefully corrupt and consume them. The existence of renegade navigators represents one of the Navis nobility's greatest fears. Each fallen navigator proves that the gene curse can manifest not just as physical mutation, but as spiritual corruption. Each one suggests that the careful breeding programs and genetic screening might not be sufficient to prevent chaos from infiltrating the bloodlines. The Order Malleus maintains jurisdiction over the navigators specifically to guard against this threat. Given the slightest evidence of corruption, Inquisitors will ruthlessly purge offending parties. Midnight raids on navigator palaces result in arrests, asset seizures, and public executions designed to demonstrate that even the powerful Navis nobility cannot escape imperial justice when heresy takes root. The navigators themselves cooperate with these purges, recognizing that the alternative is worse. Better to sacrifice contaminated members of their organization than risk the Imperium deciding that all navigators represent unacceptable corruption risks. Better to maintain their monopoly on warp travel by proving their loyalty than allow alternatives to be developed that might render them obsolete. During the Horus Heresy, when the Emperor worked on the Imperial Webway project, the Pater Nova recognized an existential threat to the navigator's position. If the project succeeded, if humanity gained access to the ancient Elder Webway for safe faster-than-light travel, navigators would become unnecessary. Their monopoly would end. Their power would evaporate. The Pater Nova dispatched agents to sabotage these efforts, successfully destroying at least some of the research and prototypes. The ethics of this decision remain questionable. The navigators deliberately impeded technological progress that might have freed humanity from dependence on warp travel, prioritizing their own survival over potentially revolutionary advancement. But from the navigator perspective, survival was paramount. They had endured for millennia by making themselves indispensable. Allowing that position to be undermined would be suicide, so they fought to maintain their relevance, even if it meant humanity remained trapped using a method of travel that corrupted and destroyed those who enabled it. This is the ultimate horror of the navigator's existence. They are trapped in a system that cannot function without them, but slowly destroys them through the very act of fulfilling their purpose. They are born into privilege and wealth, but that privilege comes with the certainty of eventual transformation into something monstrous. They possess powers that make them feared and respected, but those powers guarantee their isolation from normal humanity. They serve the Imperium with dedication spanning generations, but that service accumulates damage that no amount of medical technology can fully repair. They are necessary. They are irreplaceable, and they are paying for humanity's galactic empire with their sanity, their bodies, and ultimately their souls. Every ship that reaches its destination safely, every trade convoy that arrives on schedule, every military fleet that coordinates across light years represents countless navigators staring into the warp and enduring what no human was ever meant to witness. The Imperium functions because navigators sacrifice themselves incrementally, losing pieces of their humanity with each journey, until finally nothing remains but service and mutation. To be a navigator is to live in the spaces between human and monster, between necessity and horror, between sanity and madness. It is to know from birth that your life will be spent facilitating the survival of an Imperium that fears and despises you, even as it depends absolutely on your existence. It is to understand that the gift defining your identity is also a curse that will inevitably consume you. It is to serve faithfully despite knowing that your reward will be transformation into something that must be hidden away in darkness, remembered only as a cautionary tale by the next generation of navigators who will follow the same path to the same terrible destination. The galaxy requires navigators. Humanity needs them, and so they endure, opening their third eye to the warp again and again, staring into the abyss that laughs back at them, sacrificing everything they are so that others may travel between the stars without understanding the cost of that journey.